My name is Tyler Selhorn, and welcome to another episode of Speak Easy, the podcast where we discuss communication, productivity systems, capturing our thoughts, and how we share those thoughts with our future selves and others. Managing our brains is core to 21st century work, and we're here to learn how to do it better than we did yesterday. Thanks so much for listening. Speak Easy is brought to you by Cleft, the easiest way to collect your thoughts. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply capture your ideas wherever you are and paste them where they belong later. Today, we are blessed to be learning out loud with Susan Boles. Susan is a human-centered CFO and COO for client-based businesses at Beyond Margins. She's on a mission to help founders build calmer businesses with comfortable margins. She's also the host of the Beyond Margins podcast, the show that deconstructs how to engineer a calmer business. Okay, Susan, you said the magic words right there in the introduction of your podcast. How do we deconstruct our businesses to engineer them to become calmer?
Well, I think it is important to recognize that calm businesses don't just happen. They're not just, we're not out there walking around building businesses that are just de facto calm. I think it's important to talk about the fact that the default business that is the given is inherently not calm. It's designed to promote kind of growth. Growth at all costs is the expectation of most businesses. And that is the default. And I think the truth about businesses is that they do whatever they're designed to do. Trying to hold back a business from doing something or to try and make it do something it's not designed to do, it won't ever happen. When we're thinking about building calmer businesses, we have to be thinking about that from the foundations, because if we want to build a different business, something that is not the default, something that is, in this case, calmer, we have to intentionally do that. We have to intentionally build every single foundation of the business to do the thing that we want it to do, right? And if we're building a calmer business, it has to be the thing that we're trying to make it do is be calmer. So I believe that there are a few different elements that are common across all calm businesses. And you can use the acronym CALMER to remember them. So
well done.
Thank you.
We are geeks for mnemonics and all the different ways that we can help ourselves remember the important stuff.
I am an operations and data geek at heart. That's my background. So it's very difficult for me to create things that doesn't have some sort of system with it. So the elements of a calmer business are clarity, autonomy, a lens of care, margins, efficient systems, and rest and reduced urgency. And each one of those are elements that, based on my research, based on my experience with other businesses, those are all present in calmer businesses. So if we can intentionally design each one of those elements into all the different areas of our business, the end result is something that is inherently calmer.
I love that invitation to be thinking with intention, right? That even the way that you are expressing these like fundamental ideas about the kinds of businesses that you want to help create, like even has a system to it as well, right? When you're going to call it calmer, it's going to have this acrostic acronym happening for ourselves here. I guess maybe I'm curious to unpack even that part where, like, why does your brain want to put it in an acronym?
Why do I want a system?
Well, no, I'm just like, these are the things that are most interesting to us because we want to unlock that, like capturing our thoughts. Like this is good stuff that you can take to the market and build a whole business and a podcast around. We're excited to be sharing this moment, thinking out loud with you, but even more so, like, how do you get into the state where, oh, this is how I'm going to express this?
So actually, I used a model building model to come up with it. This is as meta as possible.
Hi, it's Tyler. All of the podcasts that I've ever recorded get to the metacognitive stuff like right away. So hi, it's me.
So my friend Mel Diesel, she has a model to help build models. Basically, it's a structure that allows you to take a concept that you're thinking about or some process. There's a lot of different ways to build models. And I used her model to walk me through building the Calmer model.
Very good.
And so for me, like my brain tends to think in routines. I like systems. I like data. Like I like structure. And I also find that having structure tends to be inherently calmer because so much of our energy, particularly as business owners or as like human beings trying to function, like executive functioning, if we spend a lot of our time and energy trying to figure out what to do. So if you can create a system so you know what to do and when, you don't have to use all of that energy trying to figure it out. It's one of the reasons that we procrastinate doing things is we're unclear about what we're supposed to do. And so for me, wherever I can create a system or create some sort of way for me to repeat this process, I like to say, make a decision once, use it over and over again. And whether that looks like an acronym, whether that looks like a checklist, whether that looks like just a general process, I find having really clear systems inherently do make things calmer, whether that's on the personal side or on the business side.
Shout out to all of the people. Shout out to Mel for using models to build models to
She's
help
amazing.
ourselves with our executive functioning. It's really fun to hear guests rhyming. We've recorded enough episodes now to hear some common themes emerging from this conversation. And I guess maybe I'm curious to hear you define executive function and helping yourself have more capacity for executive functioning in the right ways. How do you build systems for yourself that are enabling your brain to work best, to have the right kind of executive function?
So I think some of it is just really spending a lot of time thinking and experimenting with how your brain works best. And everybody's brain kind of works differently. I think people have different struggles in kind of the executive functioning process. So like my partner has ADHD, which is an executive functioning issue. And for him, his executive functioning he has struggles with in tasks, right? So doing dishes is very difficult for him because that is a task where you have to stay focused and you're just doing the one thing. For me, I tend to struggle with task initiation. So I can get into flow very easily. I can hyper focus on a thing very easily, but I really struggle to transition between one task or another or to stop doing something once I've started. So for me, a lot of my systems are focused around giving me big blocks of time and minimizing task or context switching. So like I'm one of the people where my partner, he has to do the laundry because for me, that is 85 different times I have to initiate a task. So when I do laundry, I start it in the washer. I remember that happens and then it ceases to exist. So, if I have to do the laundry, I am washing that same load, 5 times before I manage to make it into the dryer. And so I have to really pay attention to minimizing that task switching or requiring myself to start tasks a lot. So I tend to structure my days very specifically. Like I have a theme to my work week where each day has a specific theme. I specifically have days where I don't take calls because for me, I'm one of those people where if there's a call on my schedule, I can't do anything because I have a call on my schedule. So there's no work happening, or at least no deep work.
Yeah.
So all my calls, I keep them together because even though you're switching context from call to call, the overall heading of that is I'm doing calls. So it doesn't really matter what the context is. I'm just not really trying to do work versus having a few days where I don't have calls and I'm specifically focusing on a certain type of work, whether that's on Tuesdays, I do all of my content stuff because that's me in a creative headspace. I don't have any calls that interrupt that. So that's how I tend to kind of think about structuring work around what my brain has challenges with. But I think that's going to be different for everybody. And to be honest, my system now has evolved. 4 years of experimentation with what worked. I started out with just a half day or trying to do time blocking. And then I realized that time blocking like really stresses me out, having things on my calendar, like just the visual representation stresses me out. And this is something that has evolved over the course of 4 years. And so I think when folks are trying to figure out what works for them, how do they design work or structure tasks in a way that works for them, it is definitely one part understanding how your brain likes to work, how your brain is happiest, but also then just experimenting with all the there's so many different techniques you can try. If you give them a try, usually you'll find that you really like something or you really don't.
Okay, so now you've got me thinking about Tuesdays and content days and like theming our days all in general, but specifically about Tuesdays and thinking about your content. How do you capture your thoughts? Like when you're generating ideas for what's going to be written or what's going to be on the next podcast or those sorts of things, like how do you get those ideas out of your head? Or how do you get you, obviously at Cleft, we have we're voice first kind of things. And why did Justin and I worked at a voice first startup before we, started working on Cleft together. And so that's obviously like a voice draft is our thing. But what's your version, Susan?
Normally it is bullet points. So I have a project management system, and inside that project management system, I have essentially just an idea capture. Just here's all the stuff I thought about at some random point. And usually it ends up in there. Sometimes it ends up detailed. Sometimes I have a brainstorm of a particular idea. So I'll record a voice memo if I think it's something that I'm not quite going to be able to get back to from a bullet point. Sometimes it's just a bullet point of here's the topic with a few notes. So for me, it tends to be a little bit of a mix. I tend to use spoken. Like I tend to record myself when I am trying to work through an idea or clarify it. And honestly, sometimes I use my podcast for that. So I can have a conversation with somebody else going back and forth if I'm really trying to refine an idea or work through something that I'm struggling with. If it's pretty straightforward, it ends up just being a bullet point that I can come back to and use as a starting point. So for me, it's a little bit of a mix, but it all ends up living in my project management system in one place. So I have one place to go get it.
Cool. I love that you have a system and that you weigh, that you're gathering those ideas, even expanding on them if you need to. And I guess so we've deconstructed like all the way down to like bullet points of your system. Let's put things back together, right? When we start embracing this calmer model, right? Like, what are some of the things that we're going to start observing happening inside of our businesses or inside of our lives? I'm a big fan of like integrative ideas where I express myself as a spouse and as a parent and a youth sports coach and a believer and a learner and, like a software nerd, and like all of those identities serve who I am as a professional. I guess maybe I'm curious to hear you give us the zoomed out version of calmer as well as the zoomed in.
So I think for me, calmer is more of an ethos, right? Than like a specific definition, because I think calmer is going to look different for different businesses based on your priorities, based on how you like working, based like the beauty. And one of the reasons that I love working with service businesses is because you can literally make your business whatever you want it to be. There are no restrictions. There's no, you don't have to worry about inventory or suppliers or manufacturers, where that does have some kind of a construct on how you create your business. So for me, I think calm is an ethos. It's the thing that it's a little bit aspirational. Nobody's business is ever going to be 100% calm, right? Like this is what we're trying to get to. And so for me, I like to think about the macro in the micro, because I think when we look at trying to build a calmer business and then take that on as just it's a big project, it's too overwhelming. It's too hard to actually execute that. The way to build a calmer business is actually to create tiny little actions, do one little step, and eventually those tiny steps kind of build on each other and create an overall calmer ethos. So I think you can look at it in the macro. A calmer business feels, to me, restful. It feels fun. It feels not stressful. You have a real clarity of what you're supposed to be doing on any given day. There's reduced urgency, so we're not panicking. There aren't emergencies. There aren't those are the kinds of things that you're trying to eliminate. So on a day-to-day basis, I think for me, calm means sustainable. It means that this is a level and style of work that you could do forever. You have enough space to accommodate surges for when things inevitably are not calm. But that's part of building a calmer business is building in the margin. It's building in the space to be able to absorb the unexpected, to absorb busy seasons without burning out.
You mentioned in other spaces, you've mentioned experiences of burnout for yourself. And I'm curious, obviously we're strangers here on the podcast, right? And the listeners out there, we don't actually know anybody, but right size the amount of vulnerability there. What kinds of things are we need to be on the lookout for? Because you've been there, you've experienced that, and now you're helping others and helping yourself build the kind of business that doesn't have that as much risk for those sorts of experiences. Again, what are the things that we need to be looking out for to dodge that danger?
So I think it's going to look a little bit different for everybody. For me, for most of my life, was a very high achiever. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 3. I'm pretty classic Enneagram 3. I went up the corporate ladder pretty fast, pretty early. I was a CFO in my very early 30s. And part of getting there was, at least for me, this kind of boom and bust cycle. So I would perform at a very high level, be doing all of the things, all the tasks, top performer. And then after about 2 to 3 years, I would have a complete crash. So I would have to leave my job, and I would have a short period where I needed to just kind of recover or take on a project that was much easier. And for most of my life, it was that up and down cycle. And then 2021 came around. And for me, that was the breaking point. So it came at the end of at the beginning of the pandemic, my son was in second grade. And so the end of second grade, teachers no longer existed, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
The schools closed down, and we are a pretty COVID conscious family. My partner is immunocompromised. So we ended up choosing, not just for that second half of second grade, but for all of his third grade, we did hybrid and virtual school. At the beginning, what happened was I was running my business pretty regularly and sharing the teaching workload with not just my partner, but with my son's best friends, 2 parents. So at the beginning, it was 1 day a week. No big deal. That's totally manageable. I normally only work a 4-day work week anyway. No problem. But what happened is over the course of the year and a half, everybody else's jobs became less flexible. They had to go back to the office. Their bosses weren't understanding anymore. And by the last 10 months or so, it was me trying to run my business, doing the same things I had always been doing. At that point, I think I'd had the business 5 years. I had a lot of stuff running. I was doing the podcast weekly. I was working with clients on a regular basis. It was pretty busy, and it was just me. And then I was also now teaching 4 days a week. Teaching virtual third grade. And what happened is I just went so far past my capacity to be able to function that I did basically get very, very sick and unable to function. I ended up taking what I thought was going to be a 6-month sabbatical, and it ended up being close to 2 years before I came back because I needed that long to recover. And one of the benefits of having 2 years of not really being able to do anything is you really get a chance to think about what's important to you, what you want it to look like. I knew I never wanted to be in that position again. I never wanted to push myself to that extent where I didn't want to have to spend 2 years coming back from that. So when I decided to come back to work and come back to the podcast and all of those things, for me, it was really trying to figure out what is a sustainable level of work for me. And it's been a real learning journey that the sustainable level of work is so much lower than I previously expected. And so that's been a real learning journey for me. But the signs and symptoms, my brain stopped working. I stopped being able to the last few episodes of the podcast, it was me going to my producer saying, hey, I wrote things, but I'm not sure these words like together in a sentence actually make sense. I'm not sure these words are wording because I just had pushed myself so far past the point. And so I think if we can catch earlier on the symptoms and start to build in more rest, more recovery, start saying no to things, I think it can be a lot more sustainable on a regular basis. And I think taking tiny actions towards that step now prevent that burnout from happening for other people. And so I think there's a lot of different places that we can do that, and a lot of I think everybody's going to have different signs that they're getting to that point. One I think is really common is just starting to feel really resentful of having to work or having to work with clients, or like resentment starts to build up. And for me, that's my first warning sign before you're getting to my brain doesn't work or I just can't get off the couch kind of level of burnout.
Thank you for being so open about your own experience with burnout. I guess I want to transition to an invitation for you to talk about what it means for us to center our business around comfortable margins. Right? Like this idea, I guess, put it back together for us, right? We've done the deconstructing. Let's get the Legos back together on our board. And so, help us to think about, we're not thinking about margins anymore, or we're thinking about margins in a new way, right?
I think that's the key, is we're thinking about margins in a new way. And most of the time, so first, there's a reason that margins is the M in Calmer, because I believe it to be an incredibly important and critical aspect to building something sustainable. But when I'm talking about margins, I'm thinking beyond profit margins, which is how we normally think about margins. Normally, they're just in a financial sense. It's dollars and cents, and are we keeping more in our bank account? But margin literally just means space. And so when we're thinking about space, building space into our business in all of the different ways, that means profit margins, because I'm a CFO, I can't ignore that profit margins are very important, but also think about in terms of your capacity margins. How much space do you have to get the work done that you need to get done? And what are your expectations around the work you're doing? I think we need to have emotional margins, things like being a caregiver or going through some sort of crisis. Those things take emotional bandwidth away from being able to do work with clients, right? That is an emotional labor. Something about there are parts of your business that require emotional labor. And I think a lot of the times we don't consider that. Similarly, like energetic margins. How do you work best? What kind of work sucks your energy out or gives you energy? And we want to make sure that we're building space into all of those different buckets, into all of those different areas, because if we don't have space in all those areas, it's ultimately not going to be sustainable. If you don't have profit, eventually your business is going to go out of business. If you don't have the energy to keep working and you are the business owner, there's a very good chance your business cannot exist anymore. So being able to build space is ultimately what allows us that surge capacity. So for me, when I'm looking, setting the baseline levels of all of those different areas, I'm aiming for like 50%. I'm aiming for 50% to be good enough. And that gives you an additional 50% to weather tough seasons or to handle surges. And so I think focusing on building margin in lots of different areas of your business is one of the most important, and also can be one of the tiniest ways that you go about building a calmer business.
Well, Susan, thank you for zooming in and zooming out and giving us a picture on what it can be like to build a business beyond margins. Thank you for this opportunity to just learn out loud together. And thank you for bringing your expertise. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun.
The Speak Easy podcast is brought to you by Cleft, the easiest way to collect your thoughts. With our cross-platform applications, you can simply capture your ideas wherever you are and paste them where they belong later. Check us out at cleftnotes.com. That's CLEFTNOTES.com. Thanks for listening as we think aloud together.